The Sportsman's Alliance of Maine welcomes you to Inside the Maine Outdoors on Legacy 1160 WSKW. Now, here's Mike and Dave.
Welcome, and this is the debut of Inside the Maine Outdoors with the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. They are the ones putting this together. And it's, as you heard with Mike and Dave, it's Mike Shaw and, of course, Dave Trahan. David Trahan is the executive director of the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. And we also have here today Dave Sullivan, another Dave, who is going to be, we'll get to this. This is very important stuff you are going to be hearing about today. Maine's lobster industry may be in peril. Not because of lobster population or overfishing, because of animal rights activists, maybe the same type of group that wanted to put a tombstone on the interstate to memorialize lobsters who died in a terrible accident. Maybe that group, maybe a group associated with them. But you're going to hear a lot more about that. Dave Trahan, you as the executive director, this is great that you are doing this.
Well, thanks, John, for helping us out. For the listeners, we're new to this. This is going to take us a little while to sort of get it right, I guess. So we're going to look to your leadership a little bit to help us out. But we think, given with the virus problems that are out there and the social distancing, being able to communicate right now is going to be incredibly difficult. Yeah. And so we want a venue to be able to keep people informed of what's happening in the outdoors. And we couldn't think of a better way to do that than on the radio. We can reach a lot of people, and we can cover a lot of subject areas. So here we are. We want to do an hour a week indefinitely and keep people informed, particularly through the election and maybe even beyond.
This is absolutely great.
Yeah. So what we'd like to do today is we're going to call Judy Camuso, the Commissioner of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, so people can catch up on what they're doing and sort of the problems that they're seeing, and their management of wildlife obviously is going to be difficult. I'll introduce myself, Mike. Mike Shaw is a good friend of mine. We've been friends for a long time, having served in the legislature together. He was the Democrat chair of the committee, and I'll let him talk about that. And I say the committee, it's Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. And I was a Republican lead on that committee for 12 years. And so we've got a lot of experience in the policies of the department. A little bit about Sam. We were created back in 1975. CBS did a piece called "The Guns of Autumn." Dan Rather was the journalist who did it, and at the time, it was seen as one of the most biased anti-hunting stories in the history of our state and nation. And so, a group was formed. Seven members of the outdoor community recognized that we had to have a voice in the legislature and in the public to counter some of this anti-hunting stuff that was going on at the time. Created the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine, and we've been in existence since. We've really morphed into something much bigger than just hunting and firearm rights. We cover pretty much any conservation matter in front of the legislature and the people of Maine, and we're seen as a pretty influential group at the State House. And so with that, I served 12 years in the legislature, took over Sam about 8 or 9 years ago, and we've been getting stronger and building ever since. We have 70 fishing game clubs that we partner with. We can reach about 30,000 people at any given time and get them motivated on outdoor issues. With that, Mike, if you'd like to introduce yourself and sort of your history and your role here.
Thanks, David. I'm Mike Shaw. I live in Freeport with my wonderful wife and son. Currently vice president of the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine. And like David said, I was a member of the Maine House of Representatives for just about 8 years, 4 terms, on Inland Fisheries and Wildlife for all 4 terms, and House Chair for 2, served with David. And it was a really wonderful experience, actually. Being on Inland Fisheries and Wildlife was pretty easy because I love to hunt and fish, and I love the outdoors. So I guess that's about it for me.
Yeah. Well, just so you know, Mike's in this show is going to be the good cop, and I'm going to be the bad cop. But ultimately, we have a boss here, and that's John. You're the sheriff.
I will keep you in line.
Okay.
I will.
I gave him that designation the other day. He's gonna keep Mike and I in line and make sure that this is all policed in a good way. And,
absolutely.
So I think we should get right into it. Let's call the commissioner. She's waiting for a call from us to to give us an update. If you want to give her a call, we'll get her on the phone, and she can let us know what's going on with inland fisheries and wildlife.
Okay, we'll get Judy on the line. Judy on the line. Judy on the line.
Good afternoon, Judy. This is Dave, and thank you for coming on our show. This is our maiden voyage, you might say, our first shot at doing a radio program. We appreciate you coming on, and looking forward to kind of hearing what's going on with the department. I know we're in unprecedented times with the virus, and your department must be really feeling the impacts. And
yeah.
Sure. So why don't you go ahead and tell us what's going on? And you are a new commissioner, and I can be honest with you, when I heard your name was going up as commissioner, I was so excited, having just worked with you on the bear referendum and testified in favor of your nomination. I just think you're doing a terrific job. And so with that, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know what's going on with the department?
Great. Well, thank you, David, and thank you for having me. It's nice to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. I'm Judy Camuso. I am the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife. Can you hear me? Because I hear
That was my phone. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're fine. You sound great.
Yeah, you do sound good.
Okay, it's just I can hear myself replaying, so it's hard to concentrate.
Sure.
It is hard to concentrate. You probably.
You know what I mean? Like, I can hear myself. It is coming back at me.
We do that as a service. That's so yeah, fun. That's a service. It's called back at you calling. So enjoy that.
Yeah. Do you want to try calling her back? Maybe it's a bad line.
Stop now.
No, I think it's just the way the system works.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
How you doing, Judy? It's Mike.
I'm good, David. Thank you again for having me. So I am Judy Camuso. I'm the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife, and I absolutely have the best job in the world. And as Commissioner, I oversee all of the state's fisheries and wildlife resources, or inland fisheries and wildlife resources, and the management and research and protection programs that the department has for all of those amazing resources. I will say that when I thought about being commissioner, I never really thought about being commissioner in the middle of a global pandemic and the challenges that might bring us. So certainly my work priorities have shifted around a bit in the past 2 months, really, and focusing on making sure that our staff are safe and that we're still able to serve our customers. I think that we in the department are so fortunate in that most or all of the activities really that we manage are still allowable to do, and in fact they're encouraged. They're things that I think can really help ground people and help get people through this challenging sort of anxiety-filled time. And being outside in nature is good for your mental health as well as your physical health. And I think more and more people are seeing that, and we see more and more people outside every day and at all kinds of different properties that we haven't seen them at before. And I think most all the state parks and a lot of the land trusts that I've spoken to have all experienced the same thing. So in some ways, I'm super pleased to see this many people outside engaging in outdoor activities, and I hope that this pandemic can help reprioritize things for people, and that people keep this up even when our social distancing requirements relax. I hope people stay going outside and engaging in the natural world. For me personally, as stressful as some of the things we're dealing with are, walking around a trail, in my neighborhood, I've got one property that I walk kind of a lot, and just anytime there's like something stressful, pandemic sort of related, I'll go to that Florida lake and walk, and it just calms me down. And just being outside calms me down and reminds me that things are normal. And, the natural world, things are normal. Everything is okay. And we're going to be okay, and we're going to get through this. So when this first happened, my first thought was like, how can we help people get through this? What can my agency do to help people get through this? And so I think most people know the first thing we did, I think the governor issued the stay-at-home order on like a Tuesday, and by Friday we had eliminated the requirement for people to have a fishing license for the next 6 weeks, so that we could give people an opportunity to get out and engage in the outdoors and try fishing if they hadn't, and just remove that one little barrier of having to have a license. So we did that, and we've been working hard to try and come up with ways to help people get outside and giving people tips on how you can still recreate in the outdoors, how you can fish safely and still maintain social distancing and protect yourself. And so we've been working at that kind of stuff since the beginning, and likewise we put off the time frame in which people have to have their boats registered by. We started this turkey season a week earlier and added an extra youth day, which also gave the regular hunters or the adult hunters an extra Saturday. So we've been trying to come up with ways that we can encourage people to get outside, encourage people to take advantage of the natural resources that we have, and both for the short term and the long term, both right now to help them get through this challenging period, but also we hope that it instills a passion and an activity that they want to continue on and make part of their regular life moving forward. Yeah. That was a wicked long answer to that question.
Well, that's okay. That's what we were looking for. I have had some interesting feedback, and I don't know if you can maybe elaborate on it a little bit, but
sure.
On two...
We might just want to remind people who we're listening to. She's the commissioner.
Sure, yeah. Commissioner Camuso, I'd like to take this opportunity to give you a little bit of feedback, and maybe you can elaborate on whether you're seeing the same thing. First of all, on the fishing side, I'm hearing from people that the fish bit early and it seemed to be a pretty good, darn good fishing season, and it.
Yep.
Yeah, and I also understand that you folks might have been stocking trout and salmon a little bit earlier than you normally do. Maybe that helped with it, but
yeah.
Go ahead.
So one of the first things I think that first Friday or so, I actually had a call with all the other directors in the Northeast, and everybody was talking about things that they were doing, and a lot of people started stocking early. So I worked with our hatchery staff and said, look, we've got, people they're home, they're looking for things to do. Where we can safely put those fish out earlier, let's get them out. We open fishing season up, so let's get the fish out. So they've been working hard. I think they're almost 2 weeks ahead of schedule getting the fish out so that people, obviously in northern Maine where things are still iced in, they weren't able to do that. But down here in southern Maine, we definitely got the fish out almost 2 weeks ahead of schedule, with the idea that, we really wanted people to be able to take advantage of those resources a little bit early. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that. So
yeah, I've been getting some in my office. In addition to that, we have a outdoor recreational area with a kids' fishing pond, and the department has stocked that pond. And I can tell you, I immediately saw a spike in participation. A lot of kids and families went down, and I think they fished out that first batch of fish, which is why we do it.
Yeah, right.
So that's a good thing, I guess. And so it's been freshly stocked recently, and we expect that this will follow through right into June. The other thing that I'm hearing, Commissioner, is and maybe it's where you live, but folks are saying they're not seeing as many turkeys this year as they have been in the past. Are you finding that, or is it just a regional issue?
I would say that the past couple winters, not this previous winter, but the winter before that, and was a challenging winter for turkeys, and then we had a pretty wet spring, so that impacts turkey populations do kind of go up and down pretty quickly because both their some vulnerability to winter, but also even more so they're ground nesters, so a really wet spring means low productivity, and they can have a lot of young. So if they're not successful in breeding in a year, that does show up. I think it's kind of regional. There's lots of people that are seeing still a lot of turkeys, but I will say, where likewise we've heard people also saying that we haven't seen as many. So the other thing we did with the turkey season, which was unusual for us this year, was to suspend the need to tag turkeys. We did that primarily because of the at that point, we were still under pretty strict social distancing guidelines and not really allowing more than, I think, 5 people into a small store at a time. And most of our tagging agents are those small stores, and we couldn't really figure out a way that we could have people tag turkeys safely without and sort of have to go through that process. So we working with the university. We've got a lot of birds that are banded, and so we believe, working with the university and their statistician, that we can use the data from the banded birds to kind of recalibrate or calculate how many animals are harvested. So felt that we could do that for this 1 year without jeopardizing our ability to manage and keep track of the turkey population. So folks also don't have to tag the turkeys this year, which is
well, that is
going to make it easier for people.
Yeah, and as you know, Commissioner, that's been an issue in the past. People have wanted to be able to harvest turkeys, so a lot of folks saw that as a positive thing. I think it's important, though, for the listeners that don't understand turkey management, that in the springtime you can only harvest male birds, and can you tell us a little bit about their breeding cycle? I don't think that's going to have any impact on the population. If you want to explain why.
Yeah, so there's a 2-bird bag limit in the spring, and it's bearded birds only, which are typically just males. And so the way the season is timed is the season is designed to start when most of the females are already on the nest. So a lot of people think that our season starts too late because the toms have been fanning and they've been displaying and they've been doing all this stuff. And that's part of the management strategy, that we want the vast majority of the females to be on their eggs nesting so that there's no confusion about whether you're harvesting a male or a female. And so that the harvest doesn't actually impact the breeding season.
Sure.
And so turkeys are polygamous. One male will breed with many, many females. And so harvesting a male in general at the levels we're harvesting won't impact the population of turkeys. Most of the females are already bred and on eggs by now anyway. Gotcha. So that's a little bit as to why there's always some folks that think the turkey season's a little bit later than it should be. And we do, as part of our research project that we're working on with the university, we are looking at sort of what we call the phenology, or the timing of when birds are breeding across the state, and to make sure that our season is appropriately timed and that we are in that sort of what we call the sweet spot of the majority of the birds are on eggs when the season starts. And it's possible, given the large size of the state, that we might need to have some variability in the opening days. Say for the northern part of the state might be a little different than the southern part of the state. So that's some of the stuff we'll be looking to moving forward.
Gotcha. To change course a little bit, Commissioner, I've been getting a few calls recently after the governor put out her plan long-term, I guess, to open up the state that is related to your sort of jurisdiction and purview, and that is the guides piece, that people can hire a guide. And I think what's complicating it, and why I ask it, is we've had such good luck working with this administration to make changes, positive changes and whatnot. Because guides use so many non-residents, it's going to make it complicated to bring people into the state with the quarantine issues and the distancing. Do you see some policies coming forward will help the guides figure out how to operate in this environment?
Yeah, well, we're working with the Department of Health and Human Services and Economic and Community Development to develop guidelines to help the guides sort of understand, I would call them best management practices for when they're working and have clients with them. So simple things like wipe down the equipment, wear gloves, have a face mask, in case you're in an enclosed space or can't maintain social distancing, all those kind of things that make sure that if you're on a boat, that you wipe down the personal flotation devices, all that kind of stuff, those common sense best management practices. I'm also going to be meeting next week with Maine professional guides in the Office of Tourism to see how we can help promote guiding to in-state residents. So right now, it's certainly a challenge for people out of state to come into Maine. So our thought is that, we have this really great opportunity where we have a lot of people in the state of Maine and that are trying to get outside, but many of them need help. So let's facilitate that and help get some of these in-state residents or people, people that there are people from out of state that have come here and have quarantined and are just kind of camping out here for a month. They've got a summer house or a camp and they're here for a duration. So those folks are able to participate. So let's work to try and get the people that are here and connect them with guides and get them out on their first turkey hunt or get them fly fishing, get them some instruction so that they can take advantage of the skills and the knowledge of the many, many guides in the state and use it to our advantage where there are probably fewer people here than there have been in the past. So let's try and get the people and the residents that are here to take advantage of that and make use of the guides and help more people get outside and develop more skills that they can keep with them for a lifetime.
Yeah. Well, that all sounds really good. I'm glad you put that out there because there's a lot of folks kind of wondering what's going on. Yep. I guess the last subject I'm hearing about were two things. How many doe permits might you be issuing this year? And then in addition, the ability to draw moose permits and have a celebration around that. I understand it's all going to be done now through the computer and in a virtual way. I was saddened by that. I was looking forward to having a booth at the moose drawing and interacting with people. And so maybe you just touch on those two items. And
Sure. Yep. There's, I think it's hard not to feel a loss when you have something that you look forward to every year, as I do, the moose drawing. It certainly is, it's a little sad and disappointing for sure. So I appreciate that. The lottery itself is always a computer generated. There's a whole lot of algorithms that goes into, when someone gets a permit. So that's always done by a computer. What we will do is we will do a virtual sort of reading of the names, and it'll be live streamed. Our INE director, Emily McCabe, has some program. It's not actually Zoom, which many of us are used to using because Zoom won't host enough people. So Emily has some program where we can live stream it to thousands of people, and we'll still go through and read the names, but we'll also have folks like Lee Cantor there giving presentations. We'll probably have some presentations on sort of maybe how to, I'm making some of this up, it's not finalized yet, but like how to call in a moose, how to track a moose, how to gut a moose, how to quarter a moose, a little bit about moose management. So we'll have a series of presentations that people can come kind of tune in for or, come back and forth wherever they choose so that there's still some celebration around this incredible animal that brings so much economic such an economic engine for the state of Maine. So we'll still do that. And of course, the moose hunt itself is entirely on, and it will happen. And there's no concern about the actual hunt in the fall, but the drawing itself or the event around the festival that we usually have will be a more virtual event, and I will be there. So it'll be entertaining of some kind. And deer permits, I am anticipating, I've talked to the wildlife director, our wildlife director, Nate Webb, and I am anticipating probably one of the higher number of doe permits than that the state's ever issued.
Wow,
well,
that's
probably
great.
The highest we've ever issued.
Yeah, that's great news.
So I think folks can look forward to ample doe permits this fall, and most likely anybody that wants a doe permit will be able to get one. I'm not saying they'll be able to get one in their zone of preference, but
yes,
there'll be enough doe permits, I think, issued this fall that most anybody that wants one could have one, and quite a few people might get bonus permits in the southern part of the state.
Boy, that's great news, and I'm glad you said it on this radio program because I think we just got the scoop.
Well, it will. I don't have the number yet. They haven't given me a number yet. So I'd tell it. There's no actual number yet, but they will. I think we have the first advisory council meeting is in May, maybe the 20th or so, and so that's when they'll give the actual number by management district.
Great. Well, this segment's almost over, so I want to jump in, Commissioner, and let Mike get in here. I have a tendency to hog the mic, and I want to make sure the sheriff over here he keeps kind of looking over at me, and I want to let Mike jump. Do you have anything for the commissioner, Mike?
Well, since it's the very start of turkey hunt season, I had a quick question about tagging. It was always a big. I think we debated tagging turkeys in the legislature for the entire 8 years I was there.
That's right.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. Mike, Representative, I didn't even know you were on the call.
Oh yeah. It's the Dave and Mike show, or the Mike and Dave show, however you want to look at it. We debated that earlier. I wanted it to be Dave and Mike. He wanted it to be Mike and Dave.
Well, just real quick, just so you know, Judy, you know my personality. Mike is definitely here to police me, to keep me out of trouble. He's my boss. He's on the SAM board. He's my boss, and he's got to keep me in line.
Good.
Anyway, turkey tagging. Is there any repercussions as far as the federal money, Pittman-Robinson money? And the other question, I think a lot of people wanted to get away from what we had at the debates in the legislature was people wanted to get away from turkey tagging because they didn't think it was, needed, I guess. Right. But as far as wildlife management, we know that you need numbers. But it also helps the mom and pop store, the tagging stations, I guess, too. If you want to touch on all that, that'd be great. Sure.
So a couple things. Obviously, the department feels that we need to tag turkeys so that we can accurately track the population. And there's been also a lot of question around why can't we do electronic tagging or phone-in tagging. And lots of other states do that. There's no question that for those states it's a viable alternative. The challenge is that when you go to electronic or phone-in, the compliance drops down. The most we've seen in other states, the compliance drops down to about 40%. And so that means that 40% of people comply with the law, and that's on the high end. Most states, there's 20, 25, 27%. And so we don't harvest enough animals in the state to accurately do the population models with only 20 to 27%, maybe 30% of the population complying with the law. So in states like Pennsylvania and southern states where they're harvesting hundreds of thousands of animals, you can do very good statistical analysis with 27, 30% of a population. 37% of 200,000 is quite a bit different than of 27,000, So we are committed to tagging our wildlife, our big game species, so that we can, for the sportsmen and women of the state, do a good job managing those populations by wildlife management district. And so that's sort of why we have the tagging process. It certainly does help many of the small mom and pop shops that are tagging agents, and people go in, and the agent gets a nominal fee. But most often, what happens is people go in and they buy some soda, maybe a sandwich or a pizza, and they grab a few candy bars or whatever. And so it's that add-on business that really does seem to help the smaller shops. And as I think most people are aware, 2 years ago, we moved over to an electronic tagging system or direct data entry at the tagging station, so that the data is no longer collected in a book. It goes directly into a database, and it gets kind of exported to our agency live, basically at the same time. Generally, by the time the hunter gets home, they get an email confirmation saying you harvested X, Y, and Z on this date at the, with all their pertinent information. It's been overwhelmingly popular. People have been very pleased with it. The tagging agents have been very pleased with it. so much simpler than the books where you struggle to read what people's handwriting, you struggle to collect the books, books get misplaced. It's just been so much better. It's just light years ahead of time. And then last year, we instituted a dashboard, like a digital dashboard, so people can go on to our website and see how many turkeys have been harvested in their town up to that date. And that's updated daily. So it's a pretty accurate account of where things are being harvested around the state. And people love that dashboard. They use it all the time. I use it all the time. So we've made a lot of progress in our data collection, which makes our data analysis much more efficient. We're able to get the numbers out and start doing all those crunches a lot sooner. So it's been just a win-win-win for everybody.
Well, Commissioner, I'd like to thank you for coming on this morning and filling us in with what's going on. I think this might be one of the few venues in which people can now freely talk and communicate, and we wanted to thank you for that. I'm hoping that you'll come on in the future. We have a very important guest and an issue that just came about in the state with lobstermen and management and interactions with the Humane Society of the United States. I know you're a veteran of the bear referendum. We just got through that big fight, and now they're back in our state again, and we're going to be talking about that and the impacts if they're successful in some court challenges. But really just wanted to thank you for coming on, and I'm sure we'll be calling you again, and I hope you'll consider coming back on.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thanks so much for having me.
And Judy, the Sheriff John here, you said got a moose. That was cool. Okay, awkward. I apologize for that.
Okay.
Thanks for coming in, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, I want to jump in here and put a plug in for the organization. The way that we succeed is when we have membership, and our membership's always hovered around 8,000 to 10,000, and it's still there. We have, like I said, 70 fishing game clubs that we partner with. Encourage people, if they want to be part of learning more about the outdoors and defending our community at the State House, join the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. You can do so at sportsmansallianceofmaine.org. And with that, I want to transition to...
Before we do that, Dave, why don't we take a break?
Sure.
And we'll be right back. This is Inside the Maine Outdoors with Mike and Dave. We'll be right back talking lobster.
Inside the Maine Outdoors.
Welcome back to Inside the Maine Outdoors, a production of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. My name's Dave Trahan. I'm the Executive Director of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine with my two good friends, Mike Shaw, who's actually my boss. He's one of our board members, and served with him in the Maine legislature. He was the past chair of the Inland Fisheries and Wildlife Committee. And we have a special guest, somebody I know personally, Dave Sullivan. We've hunted together, turkey hunting, and we've been in a duck blind together. We don't hunt well together, though, because we laugh a lot, and our guide usually gets pretty disgusted with us and won't take us back out again. But we have a good time when we go. When I took over at SAM, I got to know Dave really well. He's the Grand Lodge representative for the Eastern Territories Machinist Union, and they oversee a lot of different union members, not only in Maine but across the country. And he brought to my attention, oddly enough, right before this show was to air, I think an issue that is very, very important to the state, particularly to the lobster industry and to our culture and past traditions, and it's a threat from a group that I'm very familiar with, having just led the successful bear referendum to defeat the Humane Society of the United States. And I know I'm going to cue this one up to Mike because he always wants to clarify who these folks are. The Humane Society of the United States. Go ahead, Mike. This is when you jump in here.
Exactly. Yeah. People have to realize it's the Humane Society of the United States is not your local dog and cat rescue. Those are called the Humane Society, and I think the Humane Society of the United States chose that name to confuse people. And a lot of people donate to the Humane Society of the United States when they think they're giving to their local pet shelters, and it's just not the case. The Humane Society of the United States, in my belief, raises millions of dollars erroneously that should have gone to the local pet shelters. So,
yeah, well, thanks for that clarification, Mike. It's important. Anytime that we use their name, we want to make sure that our local shelters aren't impacted. My wife and I donate to some local shelters, and we think that they do angels work. And with that, Dave, I'm going to have you explain what has happened there. The Humane Society of the United States has a very organized and methodical tactic when they want to go after wildlife management, and it can be bears, it can be lobsters, it can be just about anything, and that is to use the Endangered Species Act as a tool to achieve their goals, whether it's legitimate or not, and they use the courts a lot. And so with that, Dave, introduce yourself a little bit and talk about what's happened and why all Maine people should care.
Yep. Again, my name's Dave Sullivan. I represent the Maine Lobster Union. We started organizing lobstermen in about 2012 when there was a glut of lobster and the price had dropped. So we had met with fishermen up and down the coast to kind of see if there was something we could do. It's kind of out of the box for us, for the Machinists Union. Not something we typically do because they're all independent contractors and very different from what we do. We represent companies like here in Maine, like Bath Iron Works, Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, aerospace, U.S. Navy shipbuilding. We have a lot of municipalities. Now the lobstermen and the Maine loggers have joined our ranks as well. So two out-of-the-box things that we're doing. Jumping in with the Maine lobstermen has quite a learning experience for us. We've got to meet a lot of great people in the state of Maine. They're some of the hardest working people you will ever find in your life. Never looking for a handout, always working hard. What they do is a really hard way of life. A lot of them choose that life because of where they live. They live in remote areas, islands off the coast of Maine, Vinyl Havens, 15, 20 miles out. You got North Haven, you've got Matinicus that's even further out. So it's a way of life. It's not what they do, it's who they are. And once you're a lobsterman for life. So fighting for them and fighting for their issues has been a big thing for us. And the issue in front of us now is the right whale and being on the endangered species list, and what we can do to bring light to the issues and bring the real news to people and the real facts to people, because we feel like Humane Society of the U.S. has been very good at, like you said, filing lawsuit after lawsuit. They like to file a lawsuit over the biological opinion that NOAA puts out. And that is the opinion of NOAA when they look at the species and make sure that human interaction isn't going to cause the extinction of the species. So just recently they had filed a lawsuit regarding the 2014 biological opinion, and we got a ruling from the judge this past April, a few weeks ago, saying that NOAA was in violation of the 2014 biological opinion, so he's going to vacate that opinion. Very bad news for us as a state, not just lobstermen, and that was kind of a key thing that we like to bring forward to people to, outside the state to know, and even people in the state, that this affects the shore side of this state too, right? There's, the mom and pop gas stations, grocery stores, diesel mechanics, boat yards, truck drivers, cold storage. I mean, it affects, the impact is statewide. It's not just lobstermen. So, if we lose that shoreside infrastructure, we lose a lot in our state. If you've ever been to Jonesport or Vinyl Haven, there is no Walmart, there is no Home Depot, there is no TJ Maxx. You make a living off the sea or in the woods or off the land, So there is no other choices. There is nothing else when you're talking to some of these coastal communities and the income that comes into the communities. How do you pay for people to plow your roads? How do you pay for your schools? Lobstering and making a living in the ocean is what pays those bills and keeps those communities alive, and that's why people come to Maine, because they want to see the iconic lobstermen and eat Maine lobster, and it's just synonymous everywhere you go.
I want to jump in here because I'm having taken a look at this before the radio program. I think for listeners to understand the right whale, obviously no one wants a whale to be harmed. No one wants a whale to die. Their population was down to a little over 200, you told me earlier, and now it's up to over 400.
Yes.
And that, the protections that are in place are to try to bring the whale back. What struck me was the HSUS claim that somehow the Maine lobster industry is somehow hurting the right whale is just an abuse of the Endangered Species Act, because from what I can see and what I found is that The whales seem to be killed by vessel strikes. And if you could talk a little bit about the impact that Maine lobstermen have had on the right whale population, really it strikes me as a very frivolous, unnecessary lawsuit to try to encompass Maine lobstermen in this debate.
Yeah, it is. And what that basically boils down to is that Maine is the biggest fixed gear fishery on the East Coast. So it's low-hanging fruit for these people, and they want to come after them because they're all independent fishermen, and they're fiercely independent, and they know that. So because they're not, poised to fight back, right? It costs a lot of money. I mean, every time there's a dead right whale, it's $1 million fundraiser for them, and it just makes all of our people cringe because we've started taking action. They formed the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Team back in the 90s, late 90s, due to some of the right whales being killed down south. So we started taking measures all the way in the 90s. So Maine fishermen, Maine lobstermen have been saving right whales since the 90s. And nobody says that. We think that those are real facts that need to be out there. We've never had a single whale killed in the state of Maine. Maine has never been responsible for killing a single right whale. There was one entanglement back in 2002 that was disentangled and set free. But since 2002, we've taken all kinds of measures. Maine fishermen keep taking these measures. Even though they're not part of the problem, they still do it because everybody's doing it. And the TRT teams and the government agencies are forcing these regulations down their throat, and they've been doing it to save the right whale that they don't see and then are not in the waters of Maine, because what they also say is that the whales go through Maine. They come up from down south. They'll come up into Massachusetts. They'll pool up in Cape Cod Bay with the babies, and they'll stay there for a while, and then they head up to Canada, off of Canada. So Maine fishing zones, the 7 zones in Maine, go out about 40 nautical miles. It's literally a fingernail sliver of the coast of Maine, off the coast of Maine. The Gulf of Maine, which they like to claim, they're in the Gulf of Maine, which is true, but the Gulf of Maine goes out another 200 miles, where way offshore where the whales are. And an important piece of the climate change is that since 2010, the scientists have been noticing that the Gulf of Maine is warming faster than any other body of water on the planet. So with that, the feed, the copepods that the whales eat, there's great science out there from University of Maine, and we've met with the scientists, but that show that the copepods are going offshore where it's colder water. They're not coming inshore anymore. So the right whales, even though they don't do anything with right whales, they know that the right whale will follow the copepods wherever they go.
So to just jump in right here, an analogy might be that given there's no right whales in this 40-mile territory, would that be the same as trying to regulate polar bears in New York City?
100%. It's draconian measures that they're throwing out there only because it looks good on paper. It's not going to save a single whale. Then they looked at what happened last year with the unusual mortality event that happened where Canada was responsible for all 10 whale deaths, even though one was quote, marked in New York. It was found in New York, but it had Canadian crab gear on it. So, our position was that they had ship strike after ship strike after ship strike, which means the propellers or the bow of the boat hits the whale, kills the whale. And they do the autopsies on them, and they'll pull them up on the beach and go over them, which is horrible for anyone to see, including our fishermen. Our fishermen feel like they've been saving whales, since the 90s. So when they see a ship strike, it automatically falls back on them. It's another whale that was killed. It's another one out of the species, and they are an endangered species. So they're very concerned every time there's a ship strike, a cruise line. The cruise lines say, well, we run them over all the time because they sleep on the surface at night and we don't see them. So all these different factors, when they talk about entanglements, they never say what the gear is for the public, right? It's tangled up in gill netting gear, Canadian crab gear. It's not lobster gear. It's not Maine lobstermen. Maine lobstermen have not killed a single whale, but nobody knows that.
Yeah, well, one of the things I want to jump in again because I'm from the coast and I've seen the impacts of PETA going back, a couple of decades where they'd come to the Rockland Lobster Festival and they'd want to shut down cooking and ingesting lobsters, and they had their protests. And PETA is associated with the Humane Society. It's easy to make the links between them. This feels like a backdoor attempt by the PETA folks to use the Humane Society of the United States to get at the Maine lobstermen. I like to think that anytime you have a policy, particularly using the courts, that you would want your policy to be justified. And if there's no right whales in that 40-mile stretch where people are lobstering. Why in the world are we even having this discussion?
And that's the key point. That's why everybody in Maine is so upset. The fishermen are upset because they keep asking them to do different things. Gear configuration. In 2009, they made them go to what they call sinking ground line, so there's no float rope in the water. So they did that even though we didn't see any whales. We hadn't killed, harassed, harmed a single whale. We still did it because the biological opinion came out and they made us do this. So then in 2014, the new biological opinion came out, said we had to our fishermen had to trawl up. So that means putting more traps on a line offshore and inshore, but primarily offshore, trying to get them to take end lines out of the water. So they did that as well, even though, again, still haven't entangled, harassed, killed a single whale, but they still did these measures.
Hey, Dave, just for the listeners, I was a self-employed logger for over 30 years. It's one of the most, if not the most dangerous thing you can do in the world. Anytime you mention rope on a boat, it scares me.
Yes.
Having been a logger and all the things that can harm you, it appears to me that the lobstermen have already taken greater risks by having more line on their boats, on their decks for their deckhands to get entangled in and go overboard. When you say they've gone to more gear, I can just imagine what that impact has on the boat itself as far as the safety of the men and the women on the boats.
Yes, and safety is job one for us, and we worry about that every day because they want to come home at the end of the night. The kids want to see their parents grow up, but the measures that they're taking, the things that they're asking them to do, sinking ground line parts off, and runs their hands through the pod haulers and cuts their fingers off. So we have lots of fishermen missing fingers, but we can't say, well, they've got 10, they'll be okay. I mean, if you lose a finger, it's traumatic. And when you're 20 miles off the coast and you lose a couple fingers, it's not like being in Portland, Maine, where you call 911. There's an ambulance there to pick you up in like under 4 minutes, and then you're in Maine Med getting your fingers sewed back on. These people are 20 miles off the coast of Maine with a boat that does about 8 knots on a good day, in the high seas out there. And he was almost 4 hours before he got medical attention. So it's to tell a man that you got to find your fingers on the bottom of the deck and put your hand in a 5-gallon bucket and hope you make it back to shore. It's not an option. It's not fair. It's not. These people deserve better, and Maine needs to fight for Maine.
Well, I've taken a look at this issue pretty extensively, and it's obvious to me that they have nothing to stand on with this. But what I have often found in politics is it's the appearance or the rhetoric that's out there that is leading sort of the efforts by groups like this. They live off of emotion. They'll put pets up on the TV and tug at your heartstrings, and all of us legitimately want to support humane treatment of all animals. And in this case, I think the only defense you have, having dealt with the Humane Society of the United States, is their weakness is that most of their policy is not policy; it's emotion. Mm-hmm. And the only way I think you can win is to educate Americans, Maine people. Even the press sometimes needs to be educated on the issues. When you look at it, what you see is there's nothing there except emotion. And so part of why I wanted you on is I think I know our organization wants to be part of helping you educate Maine people, the press and others. This is just one more frivolous attack by the Humane Society of the United States. And we all need to band together. When we did some of these referendums, I went to unions under your jurisdiction and I said, look, would you help us? And you said yes. Mm-hmm. Well, you called me the other day and said, will you help us? And the answer is yes.
And we appreciate it.
Yeah, this is how this works. We all need to band together as a state. Outside money's always coming in here, trying to influence our policies and change our state. I just want you to know that you have a friend with us, and we'll be there to help you.
It's greatly appreciated. Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, education to the people, to the public, and the rest of the world, we think is job one for us, too, because people don't understand that fishermen, we've been saving whales. When they said that they were on the brink of extinction back in the 90s, they went from I think it was 280 all the way up to 500, and now we're somewhere around between 410 and 450. They're not really sure because they can't really track the whales, so they start showing up in different places.
And I would encourage any of the listeners to go do a little research on your own. When I started looking at it, what I was finding was maybe the U.S. Navy is responsible for some of the right whale deaths using sonar, and maybe we should be looking at that a little tougher. Vessel hits in particular. A lot of the right whale deaths, they don't even really know why they died, but they had significant damage that was done to them. and it's likely, in my opinion, vessel hits that are taking the most of the right whales.
It is. I mean, we talk about that vessel strikes.
Hey, Dave, I want to reintroduce you. Dave Sullivan is head of the Machinist Union, basically, and for the entire Eastern Territory. And I just want your listeners to know this gentleman knows what he's talking about. He represents a tremendous amount of people, and I just wanted you to just know who's talking. Go ahead, Dave.
Thanks. Part of the science, we need some type of balance, I think, between science and industry, right? So we're talking about offshore wind and putting all these windmills out offshore, right where the right whale migrates through. What it does, the noise that it puts into the ocean. We talk about, offshore gas and oil, right? They're doing seismic testing. This will cause harm to right whales, and I think it was like 30 other species that use sonar to navigate. So when you're talking about putting these huge wind farms in out there, and whales where the mothers are with their babies, their calves, and they're trying to navigate through 80 windmills with the sound and the vibration in the water, will they get separated from their babies? Will they lose track of where the feed's going because they can't use sonar? So there's all these things that could be done to save these whales. The shipping lanes and how they migrate through the shipping lanes. They know the Gulf of St. Lawrence is full of right whales. They know when they're there. They've got to stop the shipping lanes or slow them down. So there's all kinds of good things you could do to save the right whales, and they turn all their attention on low-hanging fruit is what our problem is. We are not the problem. You are not going to save a single right whale by attacking Maine lobstermen. You're not going to save a single one.
Yeah, well, I can tell you in the political world, I suspect the reason that they went after the Maine lobstermen is exactly what you said in the beginning of this segment, and that was that lobstermen are uniquely independent. They take their freedom seriously. They take their business seriously. They're not as well organized as, say, the wind industry that really doesn't need to be organized. They have plenty of money.
Yeah, they have a lot of grant money.
Yeah, they have a lot of...
When that runs out, we'll see what they do.
Yeah, they have federal and grant money to fight these things, and they can hire lawyers. And this is where sometimes you just have to go to the grassroots. And I said that earlier. You need to educate. You need to tell the truth. Yep. And just call it what it is. These folks... They'll come to Maine. They'll bring their big money and their lawyers. They'll try to get a victory here. But ultimately, they don't want any wildlife to be managed and taken or harvested by anyone. And, well, let's just call a spade a spade. And I'm sorry that this is coming down on the Maine lobstermen. I really feel bad. But again, sometimes you just got to pull up your bootstrings and take the gloves off and get out there and fight.
And we're prepared to do that. I think, like you said, education's big. I think the whole state needs to understand. I mean, people in western Maine that can't see the ocean might not think about it, but this affects our entire state. I mean, Maine needs to take care of Maine. And I know that, talking to Senate President Troy Jackson about some type of Maine initiative and Sarah Gideon, the Speaker of the House, that Maine needs to be here for Mainers. You know what I mean? We are pretty much all of us are fiercely independent, but we're an outdoor state. We love our outdoors. We hunt, we fish, we make a living on the ocean. We're a hardy bunch of people, and we're not going to just let it happen. We're going to fight it. We have to fight it. I mean, our people deserve better here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, do you want to jump in here? Mike, do you want to jump in here? Do you have something you want to ask?
Well, I tell you what. We can come back. There we go. That sounds better. We can come back and we'll finish up the show and close things out right after we take a break.
Great. Thanks.
Stick around. Back with more Inside the Maine Outdoors.
This is Inside the Maine Outdoors.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming back. I'd like to, before we get into the last few minutes of this radio program, thank John for coming on and being the sheriff. Thank Mike, my co-host, for all that you do, and particularly thank Dave Sullivan. For coming in here. He's the Grand Lodge representative for the Eastern Territories, head of the Lobstermen's Union, to update us on the actions of the Humane Society of the United States. Dave, with that, is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap it up?
Yeah, just thank you for everything. Your organization has been there for us. I know we've had a partnership for a long time, and we really appreciate that. We believe in Maine people, Maine values. We know that's your core, too, so we feel like we align very well with you guys, and just thank you for everything you guys have done. Also like to thank our federal delegation, because they've been sending letters and really fighting in D.C. over this issue for us, too, because they also know how important this is to the entire state, not just lobstermen, the entire coastal communities and the infrastructure that we have will all fail. So I just want to say thanks to them as well. And, this is going to be decided by a judge down in Washington, D.C. I wish he was here in Maine to see how we do things here in Maine and, maybe have a different, outlook on what's going on here, because our Maine fishermen are not the problem. They do not kill whales. They have not killed whales, and they don't plan on killing any whales. So just, want to say thank you for all you guys have done.
Sure. Well, thanks, Dave, for being on. We'll have you on again, too, to update us as things move along.
And David, I think I can answer your original question. The reason why the Humane Society of the United States comes to Maine is because this is a sensational issue, and with that, they can raise a lot of money. And when I was in the legislature, they had anywhere from 1, 2 to up to 5 lobbyists at a time just in the state of Maine, and they're paying all those people big salaries. They all get pensions, and that's why they're here. I honestly don't even know if it has anything to do with the wildlife and the specifically lobsters or right whales. It's about money to them.
Now, Mike, you've lived in Maine a long time, and I know you're an outdoorsman. I know because I fished with you last winter, you and your family, and I think your child caught the best fish of the day, if I remember right.
He sure did, yeah. Aaron, he caught that was an impressive.
Yeah, it was a big brown trout.
Brown trout.
Yeah. And I know that you're an avid outdoorsman. Why do you live in Maine? And tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think I'm like a lot of other Mainers. I really enjoy the outdoors. I love the outdoor heritage that Maine offers. I love to be able to hunt and gather and garden for my own food and provide for my family. I will say my wife's probably a better gardener than I am, and maybe a better fisherman too, for all I know. But however it's done, we get it done, and a lot of the food that we eat actually comes from the wild, from Maine. So that's one big reason why I love Maine, and I think all Mainers probably share my views.
Well, I know you're the vice president of the SAM Board of Directors, and a little bit about our organization and why you want to serve as a board member. And
there's a lot to SAM that I think a lot of people may not even realize. We have our youth activities. We're partnered with 4-H. We have a lot of land right here in Augusta where we have the fishing pond. The Cub Scouts come. Mm-hmm. They do camping weekends. They do fishing. They do orienteering, hiking, all sorts of stuff. And we'd love to have all sportsmen and outdoors people and people associated with 4-H become members of the Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine. You can go to our website, Sportsmen's Alliance
of Maine.org.
.org, yeah. Or I always miss the org. For some reason, I'm on this com thing. But no, Sportsmen's Alliance of Maine.org, and there's a link in there. You can join up. You can check out our website and see what we do.
All right. Well, with that, thank you for listening to Inside the Maine Outdoors. We'll be coming back to you each week with what's going on in the state of Maine, whether it's politics or whether it's fiddlehead season. We're going to try to keep you informed of what's happening, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
Inside the Maine Outdoors.